Welcome to Unschooling Conversations. Today I am joined by Heidi Thompson, PDA Extraordinaire, and in this episode we are going to talk about unschooling neurodiverse children. I'm Heidi Steel, former teacher and unschooling parent to 4 school-aged children who are happy living and learning as they go. I've been unschooling for almost 10 years. I blog regularly and I organise coaching courses and mentoring services on unschooling, which you can find out more about at liveplaylearn.org. You can also find me on Facebook at Live Play Learn, where I provide daily support and encouragement for unschooling families. We're also inviting you to get involved with future episodes by asking questions, which you can pop into the comments section for us to read, and in time we hope to respond to those with our unschooling perspective and shape the future of unschooling conversations with your comments and questions. Today I'm joined by Heidi Thompson for an unschooling conversation on unschooling neurodiverse children. Welcome, Harry. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I hate introducing myself. There's nothing worse than introducing myself, and I seldom do that seriously anyway, but then it's even more painful to listen to someone else talk to other people about who I am and what I do. I would much rather get straight to it.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter who I am, it's none of anyone's business. They can read my book and they can follow me on Facebook and they can follow you wherever you exist. Don't literally follow Heidi to where she lives. That's the intro. My parents, upon my entry into the world, branded me with Heidi Thompson, and in my adult life, I like to stick social niceties.
So I was hoping that we could talk about unschooling. And if I'm honest, I've never been congratulated for unschooling before, ever. That's not the normal. It's not the normal response.
I'm always congratulating people for unschooling because there has never been a schooling method more deserving of congratulations.
Well, I agree completely. I completely agree. It's just not normal to find people who straight off the bat recognise that and
right.
Wholeheartedly,
because it's a bit out there and different and edgy and just not the norm. So anyone who deviates from the norm is, quite frankly, stark raving mad.
Well, I think you have to be a little bit.
I know, and that's a compliment too.
From the point of view of, from my point of view, it's suitable for anybody and everybody to unschool. That for me is like bottom line. But so my personal story is that we chose to unschool when my eldest was 5. Strongly in favour of unschooling being the only way for my children and for anyone else who considers themselves not fitting
I quite agree.
Mainstream. But one of the things lots of people talk to me about is how we follow our children's interests. We don't force them into situations that they're uncomfortable in. We encourage them to embrace themselves, all that sort of stuff. And a lot of people just think that we're limiting them in some way, whereas I see it as the opposite.
It is quite the opposite. If we are to care about our children's education at all, then you're going to have to be in favour of this philosophy, because it's not only safe to use on neurodivergent children, but actually this way of life guarantees that they will reach their educational potential if we are to care about the child's education at all. we ought to be in favour of unschooling. Because if we are permitted to gravitate towards areas of interest, we cover so much more ground and more quickly, because every teacher has a duty to understand their student as a learner prior to attempting to cram potentially irrelevant information into the child's head, which will not be retained.
Absolutely. I wonder what way you think we can guarantee that we are, I can't remember the phrase you use now, but in what way we guarantee that we're doing the best for them? You know, what way is...
Well, education, when you're autistic, is, well, at least it should be automatic and effortless. It should be a process without thought, because that is what we do. We find our interests and submit to them, essentially. And that requires no effort and no thought whatsoever. What's effortful is to deviate away from that natural modus operandi, which is precisely what mainstream school does.
Mm-hmm.
It seeks to divert the child away from their own unique style of learning that they have organically created from thin air. And so that becomes an effort, because for someone else to decide or determine how the child learns when they already have a very effective learning method to begin with is an insult, because it isn't up to anyone else to decide or determine the course of action when it comes to how we are to educate ourselves, because that is a lifelong ongoing process that I am in and you are in right now. Learning does not stop. So we have to stop regarding education as something which happens for a short time in our life. Or to put it another way, most of a person's childhood is filled with irrelevant drivel.
Yeah, and it's expanding that notion of what education is and what learning is. You know, learning isn't confined to schools, and it isn't confined to, you know, like you said, childhood, you know, that, so 18, so now education is free up until the age of 18, or schooling is free up until the age of 18, you know, and reducing education and learning to only being valid in that place, so in school, valid in that time period, and opening up ourselves to this truth that we're all born curious, we all have an innate desire to learn, and that by nurturing that curiosity and empowering individuals to you know, seek their own paths of learning, you know, and as you say, including ourselves, you know, as adults, we are continuously learning. It doesn't stop.
In my book, I say I didn't realize I was at school until I left school. And I want to come back to this word, curious. So long as we are curious, we are receptive to outside information, you know. So it doesn't even have to be about increasing the child's curiosity. It can just be maintaining it.
Yeah.
And it seems to me at some point it gets drilled out of existence. So,
well, my opinion would be that happens when children enter schooling.
Yeah, sure. And there are exceptions, you know, because I often talk about how the school environment can be perceived as an external model or or it can be internally defined. So I could create right now an image of an ideal learning environment that exists very much on the outside. Perhaps we refer to teachers by we address teachers on a first name basis, refer to them, by their actual names. Perhaps we can do without any kind of uniform or rigid structure to which the child is expected to adhere. We can do away with homework, and everything is purely interest based. And the teacher's role is not to teach, as it were, but they are to facilitate the child on their educational journey. They are co-explorers, and as I said before, they have a duty to understand the student as a learner. They have to become a student first. They have to become a student first. I will make no arrogant attempt to spoon feed this child information before I understand what gives rise to curiosity in the child. How can I excite curiosity within the child? That should be the first thing teachers ask prior to approaching them fully loaded with this preordained series of potentially irrelevant and, dare I say, boring topics. Because interest is everything. Interest is everything. Interest guarantees, or at least increases the likelihood of information being successfully stored and retained. I could pretend to you that I'm reading a book, and if the content does not relate to my special interests, even though I summon somehow the self-discipline to read every word on every page front to back, I probably won't be able to tell you a single thing about that book because I wasn't interested in it, which suggests a difference between external compliance. I will read the book, but there's no internal compliance. Nothing going in, nothing's being processed. So that's the issue. We can create a kind of educational paradise for children, but then perhaps there's an internal component, which could be, actually, I'm bored of this. It's slightly too perfect. I'm going to careen back into a mainstream environment, probably not for academic reasons, but for other reasons, so that might happen. It happened to me when I was growing up. I was in a kind of PDA paradise. And then at some point I thought, actually, it's a bit too good. It's a bit too good. I want to go and do something almost a little self-destructive by placing myself in an environment to which I'm not neurologically adapted, So things like that can happen. There are obvious exceptions.
But I think there's a lot of learning that happens in that process, in that deciding for yourself, in that trying different things out, in that recognizing that this isn't working for me right now and I want to, follow a different path. And I think that is actually part of the learning experience of your own self-discovery and your own, and that is as valid as retaining information.
You stick to the path. It isn't defined by your geographical location. It isn't even defined by how many, it isn't exclusively defined by how many environmental tweaks, parents or staff can make. That does help. It depends on the child's path. We have to understand that the child is on a path and nothing can stop them. And we want to ensure that they gather momentum. We want to ensure that what they are learning extends or transcends beyond academia.
Yeah.
How can you, everything is a potential learning experience. There are educational opportunities within every experience. We have to avail ourselves to them, and in turn, they avail themselves to us. And that can only happen upon the organic kind of occurrence of curiosity. Once I'm curious, I'm receptive. And once I'm receptive, that's when learning can take place.
I love that when we support our children in this way, that they are learning also about themselves, and that equips them for their future. And we, in supporting and embracing and recognizing our children's individual personalities and needs and quirks, that they themselves value them in themselves. And then I'm hoping, because my children aren't actually adults yet, but I'm hoping as they grow to be adults, that they will be able to advocate for themselves by recognizing themselves. This situation works for me, that situation doesn't. At this moment in time, this is what I need, and be able to articulate those things. Obviously, that's my hope for the future.
That impels me to ask you a question. What goals is it safe for parents to want for their children? Because that can be quite an interesting conversation, to say the least. Many parents might say, I just want my child to be happy, whilst others might say, yeah, but I kind of just want them to get a few qualifications, you know, just to really increase the likelihood of their succeeding. And then I kind of chip in my 2 cents and say, no, happiness or success shouldn't be they shouldn't be the primary goals. They should be byproducts of something else. You know, we have to ensure right now that there is validation and space to be, and happiness is usually a byproduct of being allowed to be. You can't just strive towards happiness for happiness sake. It has to be a natural kind of byproduct of something else. As with success, don't focus on success, whether that's monetary success or success in the sense that I hope they learn how to be functional adults or upstanding members of society, or I hope they can just learn how to adult. How are they going to pay their bills and their rent and get food for themselves and ensure that the place they're living in is clean? And I say, you should not have that as the primary focus. What are their interests? Where are their sources of meaning? These are areas worth developing. Everything, usually I ask parents to stop focusing on everything they want their child to become or do, because I say these have to be byproducts. They have to be side effects. Happiness, success, learning how to adult can happen when they have a good reason to do those things. When they have a good reason to adult, they can adult. Unless adulting is a special interest, that's a completely different story. But in all likelihood, it's not going to be, you know. So I'm living right now independently, and not because I was desperate to do that, because I was desperate to do something else. And you see it to its peak, and then you get to a point where you can factor in living independently like an adult, makes sense in the wider context. In the context of what I want to do and who I want to be, living like an adult makes sense now. It has to make sense to them. You can't have these as primary focuses and primary goals.
Yeah, and I think when you do make, you know, so say you want your child to be a successful adult, then you start making, you know, in your mind, you start breaking that down and saying, well, what does a successful adult look like? Well, they need to learn how to cook, and they need to learn how to pay bills, and they need to learn how to maybe clean something. And then you start sort of imposing, trying to incorporate those things into their world because of the way you have defined what you're trying to achieve. And one of the things that I personally quite often fall back on is, if we want to prepare our children for the future or their future, what we have to be doing is meeting their needs now.
Yeah, so let's stop looking at the future as though it's an actual thing. Let's look at the present as though it is all we have. So we have to fix problems of the present right now. We have to ensure that they feel safe, contented, that they have meaning and purpose and something to work towards right now. Let's not dwell in an imagined future full of anxiety as to what they might not end up doing. It's not a safe place to dwell. Focus on what you can do right now, and then try, once you get them into a good place in the present, try and perpetuate that as much as you can. Perpetuate the good place they're in as best you can. And it's not going to be completely possible to do that, because there will be peaks and dips and variation, which are important because that's how we learn and grow.
Yeah.
But just focus on largely the present when it comes to, hey, if we're worried that they're not going to end up doing something valuable or worthwhile or whatever in the future, it's like, well, if that really is your concern, look at right now. What can you do right now, you know, to ensure that they are as physically, emotionally, and mentally strong and healthy as possible? Carry them over into the future when it finally does arrive.
Yeah, it's interesting that you should, you know, you use examples of sort of, you know, emotionally, I pick that one out, but it just in terms of, quite often people think, you know, well, one of the questions that gets thrown at us is, well, how would my child learn to deal with hard and difficult things if I don't effectively make them deal with hard and difficult things now, you know, by making them do something they don't want to do? And my response is always based on this idea of meeting their needs where they are.
Exactly. So the idea is, it's not that we don't focus on the future at all, because there's obviously things that we have to work towards and prepare ourselves for, but kind of bring the future into the present and fix it there, you know, and work on how you can make certain things meaningful to the child. You know, like I said before, you want them to cook, you want them to learn to shop, you know, the child already has the starting point, and that is their, well, fiber optic attention tunnel. You know, we have to work out how we can enter that space, and then we have an idea as to what motivates the child. You know, what are they going to avoid in favor of, you know, and then we have to work on how we can use that and grow that and expand that. And anything that you might regard as a non-negotiable or something that absolutely has to be done if adulthood is to be reached, let alone lived optimally, has to be incorporated into the child, into the world which the child can relate to.
So I mean, that's this idea of being in tune with our children and recognizing maybe what this fiber optic, you know, focus is. How would you suggest that we introduce things into that sphere, their sphere of interest that they've got?
I don't like it when parents or teachers are looking for ways to do anything. If they're looking for a way to do something, it seems to me to be reminiscent of some kind of agenda at play. You know, I think the first thing we do is just nothing. Let's arrive at a state of nothingness, or as nothing as we can possibly get it, because nothing provides the space in which something can grow. The first thing we have to do is throw out any kind of agenda, any kind of traditional handbook that has been bequeathed to us goes out the window. We start again from scratch. So it's a process of decontamination and skin shedding that a parent or teacher have to undergo. Just nothingify yourselves right now. See if you can do that, and then start from scratch. And like I say, when you approach the child, you initially are the humble servant. You are the student. You are there to learn. The child's world has to be entered, and therefore you have to earn their respect, earn their trust. How can you get inside? Because a lot of the time a parent will say, they won't let me in. And it's like, okay, so what are you doing wrong? Let's have a look at that. There is an approach that guarantees rejection at the front door of your child's world. There is something you're doing, and it's often a case of, does my goal and their goal, and my vision and their vision match?
Yeah, interesting.
Converge in any way whatsoever. what I want, is that the same as what my child wants? If it is, then we're going to immediately stumble into a conflict. There's going to be resistance from the word go, because I want something to happen that they don't want. So it's why it's problematic to phrase the question as, is there any way or any strategy? You know, I try and throw these words out, because that's not what happens at first. At first, it's not about how do we get the child to.
That's interesting. That's the phrase that really gets me when people say, how do I get my child to?
Yeah, so I've got a video on this actually, if any of the listeners want to check it out on my page, because it really gets my goat, that one. How do I get my child to? You have lost, the moment you have asked that, you have lost the battle, because it suggests that you have not relinquished your authority. And it also suggests that your goal is to exert control over the child, and or seize control from the child. And it's never going to work. You have to work towards shared goals. And people say, but I don't know what the shared goal is. Start very small. But all they do is play video games all day. You start there then. That's where they are. They cannot access the world. To them, the world outside their video games is a chaotic mess. It is a disorderly cesspool that is not worth stepping into. So you cannot encourage the child away from their safety point, because that's what it is. They're solutions, not problems. We have to start seeing video games as solutions. It doesn't mean that we should find it in ourselves to be okay with the fact that the child won't do anything else other than Xbox. Or whatever console they're playing. We have to understand that for the child, the world is not to be touched, because that is where they've been traumatized. That is where they have been either lied to or hurt by someone. So it's the parent's role to get inside the child's bubble first. Prove that you belong to the world and you are trustworthy. That's your first goal. Prove that you have come from the outside world and you come in peace and you mean them no harm.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I mean, that's one of the things we advocate for, you know, joining your child in their interests, no matter what they are. And it's interesting you pick video games, because that's usually the most contentious one, and it is the one that they that they are particularly interested in, for all the reasons that you mentioned. So, you know, joining them in their interests, if your child is open to you doing that, finding out about the games they're playing them. You know, I used to download the same apps that my children have, and then I would, you know, play them, so that I knew when my child was talking to me about them, I knew what they were talking about, you know. So there's that sort of thing. But one of the other things for me that has been quite useful is watching my child in the relationships he has with his peers, particularly, and how those relationships works. He obviously feels very comfortable with his peers. He obviously feels, or these particular friends that he has, he obviously feels safe with them. And watching as an adult, watching as the parent, how are those people interacting? What is different about their interaction as opposed to, you know, say a parent-child interaction, that interaction for my child is safe and fulfilling and enjoyable.
It's learning about the child's world. And I want to return to what you were saying about how is it that they seem to engage in a relatively stress-free discussion with their peers online, whereas it doesn't seem to be the same kind of social chemistry with the parents. And that's because online they are in the Goldilocks zone, you know, and that's a place that I urge parents and teachers to get to. Are you in the Goldilocks zone? If you're not in the Goldilocks zone, nothing you say makes any sense whatsoever. It's just white noise to the child, and it's bothersome. It's a bit like when you're driving cross country and you lose one radio station and then the next one starts to enter into, you know, the range, which, you know, near enough for the radio to tune into it, and then it's like very distorted. You can just about make out a few sounds, maybe the odd line of a song. It's like that when parents are speaking to their children in a certain manner, they're doing so outside the Goldilocks zone, and therefore the child is only ever going to be confused and angry. As if to say, I'm over here, damn it, I'm over here and you are over there, and I can't move because, one, I don't understand how the world works because it wasn't designed for the autistic mind, and two, it's like scary out there, it's unsafe out there, and it's a minefield. Every time I go to do a life, I get stung. So I am fairly blind and clueless as to how to proceed in many situations. So, hey, if you come over here, that'd be great. At least we can start somewhere. See, encouragement and progress are not the priorities. The first priority is validation. A parent should be all, hey, yeah, don't move from that bed at first. Don't move. I get it. The world sucks. The world has hurt you. And if I were you, I'd be in the same position. You have to fully empathize to that point. Don't move, because the child is in a state of, I can't move. So a parent, if they are on the child's level, truly, they will say, don't move, because they will know precisely why the child will not move. That's truly empathizing. That is how you know you're on the same level as your child. You can be in an ideal situation whereby you and your child are navigating the environment. You know, you're exploring together and learning, or you can be in a not so ideal situation where the child is confined to one space. And if you truly empathize with the child, you'd be like, oh yes, I can see from your perspective just how terrible the world is. Either stay there and let me sort a few things out, or can I come in and I mean no harm. I won't put you under any pressure. Can you just show me how things work inside your world? That's the starting point. Progress comes later. Progress is what follows from feeling validated.
So a lot of the people that I work with have had children. So as I explained before, my children haven't actually ever been to school, but a lot of the people I work with have had children who have been in school. And then when they come out of school, they have, you know, they've had such a terrible time, the parents and the children. But most importantly, you know, the children, and they've suffered significant trauma at the hands of you know, mainstream education, and so giving our children the time and the space they need to heal from that, and what that actually looks like is, and as you say, you know, the time that takes is really valid. That time needs to be taken. We can't skip that bit in any way. It's like, if, well, you can't, it's impossible actually to get to a point where your child is feeling happy and safe if you skip out the bit where you make them feel happy and safe. I guess my experience and a lot of the things that I talk about is, you know, allowing your children to do what feels safe for them. So like you say, if they want to cocoon themselves in, you know, the bottom bunk and wrap themselves in duvets, and that's where they are safe and that's where they want to be, that we need to allow them to do that, and we need to give them the time to do that.
You have to trust that is going to be temporary. Don't fear that they're going to be doing that for the rest of their lives. In fact, don't even trust that it's going to be temporary. Just trust that this needs to happen right now if we are to see any positive change at all.
Which goes back to our point we were making before about in the moment and the now, giving them what they need. That's what they need now.
People do that. People cannot help but shift their focus to the future. Stop doing that now. Let us heal the wounds. You know, if we have any chance of the wounds healing, we take control of the healing process right now. You know, we can determine the outcome by making the right decision presently. I think as well, parents might say, oh, is this not giving in to them a little bit? It's not indulging them. It's like, look, their position is that the world has taken so much from them, and it kind of has. The world has robbed them of so much. Being alive has robbed them of so much. So it's not indulgence. We're actually redressing what has been taken away, and focusing on, building mental strength in the face of adversity. That's a lesson for a later stage. We're not there yet.
No.
It's a bit like when I attend school meetings and the teachers say, oh, should we not send them a little bit of homework? It's like, they're not there yet. They're not, if they are there at all. I don't think sending children work to do should be a thing under any circumstances. But let's say it is. They're not there at the moment. It's not school refusal. It's life refusal. It is, I have been wounded by being alive. The last thing on their mind is producing even the tiniest amount of schoolwork. What I find
really fascinating, which might just be a personal fascination really, is that in that situation, our children actually know what they need. They know that they need to be cocooned, or they know that they need to be, they know the safe environment that they need to be in. They know that they need to have a room of their own, or they know that they need somewhere quiet. They're naturally drawn to the things that they need, and quite frequently it's the adults around them that pull them out and say, no, I think you need this, or we should be working on that. And to put ourselves in a position of being their ally in that situation, and back to that validating again, just saying, if this is what you need, I'm going to support you in this, by providing you with the space and the time and the resources. If you need fidget spinner, I'm doing this like a fidget spinner, something, to become their ally, and to become someone who is trustworthy in their lives, and someone who is on their side and advocating for them. Before we wrap up today's session, I wondered whether there was any parting words of wisdom that you would like to share with us.
Don't change to fit in.
No.
Be yourself relentlessly, and subdue society into changing for you.
Today's conversation has been a real insight into how unschooling can be supportive of our neurodivergent children's lives, their pathways through life, and how we can be their advocate and their partner on their journeys. So thank you for joining me, Harry. It's been an amazing chat, and I hope that we will be able to get together again sometime soon. And you can join me again in the next episode, when I will be talking to unschooling parent Adele Jarrett-Kerr from Revillaging. We will be discussing decolonisation and anti-racism work in unschooling. So I will see you then.
Bye.
Thank you.